Welcome, everybody. This is Daren Klum from Tech Talks. In today's episode, we're going to be interviewing Matt Versaggi, the head of United Healthcare's Artificial Intelligence and Quantum Computing Group. Matt is a distinguished engineer at Optum who is leading their artificial intelligence and machine learning teams all around the world, and he's also leading the strategy and R&D on top of all of this work. To say that Matt has a very full plate is a total understatement, but we are very fortunate to have him here with us today to talk about all the amazing things that he's doing to transform healthcare and using some of the most advanced technology in the world. So, Matt, welcome to the show. We are so pleased to have you today.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will try my best to add some value to your constituency.
Well, hey, I've heard you speak before, so I know you will. So I don't even know where to start, but you have done so much in your career, and so you've been a CEO of your own company. You've been a professor at DePaul University in Chicago. You have an incredible educational background in computing and computer science. I would say I would sum up your career as exhaustion. Does that sound about right?
I think I look for more. I kind of categorize it as more of a Renaissance approach, where you do lots of stuff and hopefully they fuse together and something good comes from it.
Yeah, no, that's true. So as you kind of look at your career today, just in your own words, I'd love to hear how you got to where you are and really your journey into leading, I would say, the most important technologies in all of United Healthcare.
So the journey is going to be one of passion and infusing it together different domains. I've always been interested in many different things. Computer science, artificial intelligence, I've been trained in the business side, being an entrepreneur, teaching folks as well. All of those things sort of come together over time. For me, they were just sort of a blend. And then the adventure into the UHG family came because I was an AI engineer for a military contractor prior to coming here. And as often happens in that space, they lost a big deal. And they had to let go of a lot of their folks. So I just flipped a switch on my LinkedIn profile, and one of the head recruiters from UHG called the very next day.
Wow.
The rest is history.
Wow. Well, so now as you look at United Healthcare, everybody knows United Healthcare, one of the largest companies in the world. And but a lot of people don't know Optum, or they may have heard of Optum, but they kind of go, well, I know it's a really big part of United Healthcare. I don't really know what they do. What would you sum up Optum as? Because I know, for a lot of our listeners, they may not understand fully what you guys really do.
So Optum is really, I think, is a emerging and transforming healthcare technology company that has a lot of facets to it, from employing large amounts of clinical staff, particularly nurses. I believe we may be the largest employer of nurses on the planet.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I've heard that somewhere from some reputable sources, so I take those for granted. We get involved in a lot of technology in the healthcare processing space, particularly payment integrity. So, and in that kind of a risk space, in lots of other areas, R&D, consulting, and many of those other spaces, it's really a neat place to work for so many reasons. We're trying to just take the cost of healthcare and really take some great tech and get it out there to help people.
Wow. Well, I think you guys must be doing pretty good, because I think in looking at the financial reports of United Healthcare, you guys did about $100 billion of almost 51 or 2% of all revenue. That's pretty impressive.
That's a lot of zeros.
Wow. That's a lot of zeros.
It's a lot of zeros.
But also it's your scale too, right? I mean, your scale is so massive. Like how many people do you think you service just in a day?
Oh boy. I think that's a number that even escapes my radar. It's more than most people can fathom. The scale of healthcare, just in general, and that underpins everything we do. Scale is a major issue. Everything has to scale.
Yeah, and then all that data. I mean, the data alone. I mean, this plays into obviously your role, because with all that data, you have to utilize it for better outcomes, for doing a lot of great things, and so. And this is going to be, I think, a perfect segue into your role. Can you talk to me a little bit about your role and what you're doing with, I know you do so much with artificial intelligence and quantum computing and machine learning. Would just love to kind of learn what a day in your life looks like and what you do.
Oh boy, where do you start? So I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, right.
And I wear a lot of hats by choice. I mean, I like a rich variety of experiences to engage in. So I really do a number of things. So I'm a technical SME. We go and get technologies from, the defense arena or heavy academia arena that you wouldn't ordinarily see in the haunts of the kind of industry we're in, incubate them and try to solve difficult problems with those, like intelligent agents and cognitive technology
Sure.
and quantum and things like that.
Right.
Education's me. So we educate our own within our own internal university. Much of the pedagogy of creating the next generation of AI engineers I've developed and helped put out there.
Wow.
Senior leader in delivery. We've seen 260 use cases in 2 years and delivered 74 projects. So that's a lot of use cases.
Yeah.
That's an education in and of itself.
Yeah, no
I've done a lot of
kidding.
speaking. I've done 13 weeks, 14 weeks of speaking a couple years ago and involved in that whole thought leadership evangelist space.
Yeah.
Been a mentor for 3.5 years, internal, external, everything from summer interns to executives to startups in AI and healthcare space, and a strategist. So lots of different hats that I wear.
It's kind of interesting, like, and being a technologist myself, you have so much that goes around a new technology, right? You have the actual, like you said, standing it up and getting the technology to work and integrating it. And then you have the training of the people and helping people understand it. And then trying to inspire the next level of leaders that will take that technology, make it better and progress it. And so you're really involved in really the whole ecosystem of it, really, if you think about it, right? I mean, that's kind of what you do.
I do. And that it's an amazing experience. And it's one of those where the kinds of problems that we see demand solutions that have a Renaissance kind of approach to them that span
Right.
different aspects of the business. And the supply and demand of talent, the migration of that talent, the education of the leadership who are steering the ship in ways that they can make better use of this talent to steer the ship better. All sorts of things. And it's a positively reinforcing scenario where when you learn a little bit more in this one area, it tends to help out a great deal over here. It's kind of the balancing of a portfolio. And they tend to fuse together over time. And that's where the beauty of it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And I would also probably say is one of your biggest hurdles as you're looking at all of this is like getting the right people trained and educated because I don't think a lot of people go into college going directly after this field. I mean, maybe it's one that you may find really talented people, but you have to kind of get them into it, right? I mean, would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, and in fact, we've had a very interesting journey in that space. So in the healthcare space, as well as anything, when you're a technologist, you really have two problems. You have to develop the sharp skills of your technical trade, computer science, whatever it may be. But then you will not execute those in isolation. Those will be executed in either a business or in the healthcare clinical domain as well. And so there's this whole other aspect of learning. There's this secondary unseen educational experience that you have going into the domain you're going to be practicing those tools in that that is nobody accounts for. And we've had to take steps to fuse both AI and healthcare with outside vendors. We prod them and say, hey, develop an education routine that I can take these guys and fuse these two domains together and get a jump start on our and applying this technology across these domains. And we've done that. We've actually gone to folks like Udacity and said, you need to fuse together an AI and healthcare nanodegree, and they did. And so those are kinds of things we end up looking to do.
That's amazing. So, and just the amount of work that goes into that, I can't imagine. But this is why you guys are the leader, right? I mean, this is why your growth is so massive because you are going into these areas, you are doing the education and training the next, leaders. So now this kind of segues, and you'd mentioned something in your last comment there. I don't think most people see the medical industry really turning into a technology industry, but it kind of is, isn't it? And can
Oh
you
boy,
talk
is it.
about how? Yeah, I mean, what is that transformation looking like in the medical industry right now? Because it's changing fast, right?
Yes, it is. So um, there are probably 24 use cases that are like if you think of using artificial intelligence in all of its forms, and I mean the entire portfolio, not just machine learning, data science, and deep learning, cognitive technology and robotic process automation and complex event processing and knowledge graphs and graph theory and graph databases and all those kinds of things to get
Hmm.
healthcare graphs. You fuse that portfolio of technologies with the strong use cases that exist that in this ultra rich space called healthcare, and you really get some forward thinking areas. So healthcare in and of itself is probably one of the richest domains for the forward movement of AI and its supportive and undergirding technologies, as is say the DoD.
Wow.
And there are all kinds of spaces from aging, chronic end-of-life care, patient personalization and precision medicine, smart hospitals, putting sensors in
Yeah.
everything so the hospitals get so smart they become part of the care team. Um,
And
Electronic
that's
medical
starting to
records.
happen. I mean, look at what you guys have done in that space alone. I mean,
Yep.
it's just creating a better experience when you're in a hospital, right?
Well, think of it this way. What if the hospital had sensors in everything and everyone? It had sensors on the patients, on all the devices that are monitoring those patients, and it had an artificial general intelligence or a number of those that are monitoring everyone and everything from the supply lines of supplies coming in to the optimization of the ERs and ORs to the
Wow.
triage area, and even in relative um, response to traumatic events out there in the whole. Like, if there's a mass shooting or if there's some kind of a pandemic that happens, the hospital itself can sense these things and make adjustments in real time to be part of the care team and help the welfare of those who are in the building itself. The domicile becomes smart. You're seeing that in smart cities. You're seeing that in smart
Hmm.
houses. All of these are latent trends that require enormous investments in infrastructure and technology, and are are able to manifest themselves because of smart technology.
So now here comes a question, and I think this is one that as I'm kind of listening to you talk about just this transformation within the hospitals and in medical, um, there's a huge cost to this, right? Do you feel that the cost slash benefit equation, um, I mean, are we at a point where that is palatable? Because it seems like, greater efficiencies is amazing. We need them. We need better care, absolutely. But all this technology is not cheap. So do you
No.
feel like there's a way that cost can be handled within the current way we do things?
Well, it absolutely has to be. I mean, one of the
Oh, well, I
major
agree. Yes.
really, I mean, people don't realize how much pressure is being put on the institutions in this industry to reduce costs and waste and abuse and things like that. And not only that, but there's this general migration. Well, this is the monumental migration from fee for service to value-based healthcare. That's the largest context of
Yeah.
all of this. That's a broken system, and
Right.
and it needs to get to a system that is fixed, that creates a economic system that generates real wealth that is based on keeping people healthy instead of simply treating them as singletons when they get sick. And they have to do it at scale, and they have to do it at low cost. And that's where, when you look at the smartness of technology and the interconnectedness of these networks combined with these amazing, powerful phones that are now having small economical attachments that can do clinical assessments, um, and
Yeah.
that combine with um, wearable technology from smart patches to phones to other kinds of sensors, that allow us to do anywhere care, just-in-time care, patient personalization, and mass personalization included, at the right cost. Now, that's where we have to go. But that's also a huge business opportunity. And so what happens is people look to make those investments all the time. And so they're not going to make investments in stuff that is going to be sunsetted. They're going to make investments in areas that can return a return on investment, and that are future thinking. So I think what you'll see is the diversion of much of those investments, both in the corporations themselves and in the startup community, VCs included, towards these new spaces that will show real promise. But there's attach that human element to it, that service the humans.
But that can never go away, right? I mean, we're not going to have robots that are going to be taking over everything, but I think but it's really what you're talking about is really the true digital transformation of healthcare, and really how you get to taking pressure off the people that are working so they can actually spend their time with care, right? Versus
absolutely
getting all of that stuff out of the way so they can actually give better care, right? Isn't that really what it's about?
That is absolutely what it's about. There's a phrase we use when it refers to the clinicians in the space, and that is called, we want the clinicians, the clinical staff, from the nurses all the way up to the doctors themselves, to operate at the top of their license. And that means that they practice medicine. At the bottom of their license, they're digital input clerks, which is really where they are today.
Which is horrible.
It's absolutely horrible.
It is
the burnout rate of nurses and clinicians is enormously high because they just don't want to have that technology get between them and their patients.
Right.
And so, but it's dumb tech. And it's
it really is. Like, we all seen it, right? We're all in there. We get asked all the questions and see all the forms. And I mean, you spend the first 40 minutes of any doctor visit just filling out all the paperwork, right?
That's exactly right. Now, what if an AI did that for you?
Exactly.
Like it took your EMR,
please hurry,
all that stuff. And not only that, but what if the AI went to the doctor and said, you know what, I just digested this whole caseload for you with this one very critical patient, and you don't need to know all the stuff. Here's the 5 things you need to know. But if you want to figure out all the rest, you can look through all the documents. They're all digitized. But here's what you really need to know. It informs the doctor, so it takes the load off the doctor.
That's huge.
And then the doctor's got augmented decision-making capabilities that let them not have to exert so much effort to get at the right data for the right person at the right time. It changes the game.
No, that really does. And by the way, this is a beautiful segue into your work in artificial intelligence. And so I know, Optum and United Healthcare are the leaders of bringing artificial intelligence into the med space. So what are you guys doing within the realm of artificial intelligence? Because I know you're doing a ton.
We are, and it's really hard to wrap your head around it. Most people, when they think of healthcare, they think of the clinical space. So we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about that. But there's other spaces in research. When you're doing medical research, there's optimization of the medical ops process itself that we do a great bit of work in. But the really interesting stuff is on the front lines of clinical. I mean, that's where AI can actually help people, but it is everywhere. I mean, it can be all across the business units, from marketing to legals looking at it. This, which is great because AI would be good to upset that apple cart, and many other spaces that you wouldn't ordinarily consider AI to play a part. It really does.
Yeah. Well, and now has it kind of surprised you just how quickly it's proliferated? Because I'm constantly amazed at when I first saw artificial intelligence many years ago to where it is today, and how it's just been integrated into almost every aspect of our life. I mean, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's got a long way to go.
Yeah, it does.
It's matured, but I think what we're looking at these days, when we begin to measure the epochs, you've got children, they go to grade school and then they go to high school, and then they've crossed a big line there. They're no longer in 8th grade. Now they're a high schooler, graduate high school into college. The 3 epochs we see is first wave, second wave, third wave of AI. First wave is what we used to call GoFi, good old-fashioned artificial intelligence.
Right.
Second wave, and then you program stuff with Lisp or Prolog. And second wave is all this deep learning, machine learning, those kinds of things. Fascinating, powerful stuff. Data oriented. You need data to kind of make these things go.
That's right.
The third wave is cognitive technology, where we're seeing
That's where I get excited.
artificial general intelligence capabilities from the point of view of an engineer, not the paperback writers, the engineers,
right.
who are really making this stuff, and we're using some of that as well. We're doing some really good experiments with the SOAR architecture in trying to get that in those places. So we've seen those three epochs, and those allow us to attack each one of those allows us to attack a different caliber of problem,
Right.
more sophisticated, those kinds of things. So
Right.
I think that's a good landscape.
It is, and I guess as we look at AI, and I've been saying for quite some time that AI has become one of the single most overhyped words, and it actually reminds me, and I've said this in other interviews, a lot of back in the day when e-commerce first came out, everybody had a different idea of what that meant, and so AI came along, and I think Watson kind of played into the hand of its magic, right? It beat, somebody in a game show, or it beat a human in a game show, and so it's going to take over the world, and we should all be afraid of it. And so there's a lot of misinformation. So since we have this podcast, we are with one of the leaders in this field. Please demystify AI for us, please. It's not, according to Elon Musk, AI will eat the world. Is that true? Please.
No, that's not true. So I wrote. So let's take the apocalyptic AI impending doom, where it becomes conscious and sentient, and we have to give it rights, or it becomes our overlord, kind of thing, out of the picture. I wrote a document on LinkedIn, a paper on that really addressed that. There's really good scientific and philosophical reasons why that particular event horizon is just not going to happen. But if you take into account the writings of, the journalistic community is kind of in a nosedive these days, as well as the paperback novel writing industry. And when an AI is just one of those other gifts that sort of just keeps giving to that space. And so we get media coverage that is less than helpful in that area. But there's another aspect to this that I think is a bit nefarious, and that is that there are very good data scientists out there working in the media. And so the influential people in various industries are fairly easy to target these days. And so you can get an executive that's flying from New York to LA, and on that flight, he's going to pick up something between pieces of paper, usually laminated, and read about it to help nourish their mind and develop themselves intellectually. And what we found is that many of the journalistic articles that we see these guys reading are chock full of disinformation. And now when that executive gets off that plane, he's going to command his resources to go manifest what he just digested. And therein lies the problem, that there are certain pools of knowledge that have been tainted in that space. And there are certain pools of knowledge that are fairly pure. And we would like to, we hearken people to stay closely tethered to those areas that we know are pure, that are not tainted from those elements. That's the only way to stay free from that kind of hype, but it is a big issue.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because, as a computer / security person that I am, I always look at things from the standpoint of, well, how would you break it? How do you break AI? And it's clearly in the data, right? So if you have fake news, we're starting to see what's happening into our own networks, right? We have all this fake data floating around out there on social media, and people start reacting to it, and it's ruining the system because there's not a source of truth that people work from. And so it's kind of interesting how you're starting to see how these data models right now are failing just with just our own information, right? Now, when you start having computers and AI acting on data, it's going to become very paramount that we are able to protect data and also curate, because an AI has no way to know what's real or fake, right?
Absolutely. At this point in time, unless
it's but that's going to come, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, one of the chief examples that we see out there is, CNNs, how you fool a CNN. You can give it a picture of, a building. And if it's been trained to see that building, it will come back and say that's a building. But if you change the pixels, we call this a one pixel attack. When you overlay an image, because of the nature of that convolutional neural network, we call them CNNs, it will look at that and say, oh, that's an ostrich.
Yeah, right.
And so
right,
you see those
right.
kinds of things. But there's a bigger issue here, I think, that needs to be kind of ferreted out, at least in the data portion. Now, when you get to cognitive architectures and reasoning capabilities that are inherent in AI, the game shifts a bit. But in the data-oriented space, you're going to hear a lot about ethics out there. We've got courses in ethics. I think if you're in our shoes, one of the most important things is like everybody who is involved in AI engineering has to take an ethics class, because we need to be able to tell the public we are educating our folks in ethics for
Right.
AI.
Right.
Otherwise, you're a big evil insurance company. We don't want to be that.
Right.
The
By
other
the way,
thing,
that's a fascinating thing. Like you have to build almost a human element into this, don't you think? I mean, because AI becomes so efficient and almost too efficient, and you lose the human element to it, right? I mean, isn't that kind of what the worry is? Is that, it becomes so efficient and so good at accessing and analyzing and going through all this data that human error that we have in our current, just the way we work as human beings isn't perfect, but AI can be. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
that creates a very ethical, not even
yes,
an
it does.
ethical, just a human problem, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the objectification of humans like bits.
Yeah.
Humans don't like to be objectified.
No.
You're
Right.
absolutely right with that. When it comes to data-oriented piece of that, you will see concerns in that. Like, are we getting, like when it comes to machine learning models, they really just learn it's either inductive or deductive reasoning in sort of the technical sense, where they look at pictures of cats and dogs and learn the difference between cats and dogs. They don't memorize those differences between cats and dogs. They
Right.
memorize catness and dogness, and then you show them something new and it goes, oh, that resembles catness. I believe that's a cat. The
Right.
problem is that that's an amoral process. It's just an efficient stochastic statistical process that works, and we know works.
Right.
But
Right.
if you feed it information that kind of muddies the water, it's going to process it just the way it knows how. And so garbage in, garbage out, I think is going to be an issue that gets much more attention moving forward. Are we really giving it the right data? Are we sure we haven't made some mistakes in that data? Is it truly randomized sample? Those kinds of things. But I think
And
the
that's a
answers to
limited
those.
knowledge problem, right? I mean, that's if you're to characterize that with AI, it's really the limited knowledge problem. And once we move into general intelligence, that will deal with some of those issues, right? Because now it can ask a question like, is that really a cat? Is that real? And it can have other data points that it can look at to reason in us. I mean, isn't that really what it's about? It's just trying to create reasoning in a sense
Yes.
within the data models?
Yes. Yep. I think that's important, because when you make that shift from second wave to third wave,
Right.
because second wave AI doesn't reason. It does clustering, predictions, classifications, maybe some language stuff, some image processing. That's it. There's no reasoning going on. Those swim lanes are very strict. But when you combine that with a reasoner that comes inherent in these cognitive architectures and cognitive technology, now you're at a level of complexity that can double check itself. And
Yes.
that's going to be helpful. You'll start seeing that in time too.
So now, Satya Nadella talked quite a bit about the democratization of AI, which I really do believe is going to be critical for the future of our world. Because what I see starting to happen, and unfortunately, like all good things, let's face it, people are going to make money from it, right? And you're going to have those that have access to AI and those that do not, and there will be a very big gap between those two people. Because I think well, I'll give you a case in point. I know some guys right now that, in fact, I was going to be involved with them early on, and I gave them some of my ideas. But what their whole idea was, they want to take all the weather data all around the world and wanted to create a model to predict weather with almost a 90% certainty so they can trade commodities. And so the whole idea is if we know we're going to have a drought year down in Florida and we know that the orange crop is going to be bad, you can start placing bets to make money off of that knowledge, right? Now, that's knowledge that a common person wouldn't have, but a technologist would. So how do we, as we start doing this AI transformation, democratize it? It's a very, like Sachi uses the word all the time, but you guys are going to be one of the leaders in this field. So how do we make it fair? How do we make sure that this isn't being used against people and that is actually benefiting and that we can all benefit from it?
Yeah, those are the questions that I think mankind wrestles with in this domain and many, many others. I mean, these same
Yeah,
questions were being thought of when we started splitting the the atom in Oppenheimer's day. Um,
sure.
and it is a sad state of the character of humankind these days to watch those patterns repeat itself over history. And I have little doubt that will again repeat itself in this space. I think the only counter to that is having good folks who have laudable altruistic tendencies to them, who are determined to be on the other side of that equation and balance it.
Right.
And that will be helpful because there can be nefarious activities in that space, but there can also be folks who are just as capable, but who wear a white hat instead of a black hat. I think
Right.
we'll see some of that too. But the other thing that's part of that is it begs the question: how is the population going to change with this new technology? Like we've seen
Yeah,
an
that's true.
enormous change in the population with the advent of social media. It exposed holes in our character, our personal character at large. We just didn't know was there because the capabilities were never enabled at scale. And
Yeah.
now we
Yeah,
see that.
that's true. That's right.
And when you combine that pattern with the other pattern that we fuse that together with, and that is that, you know, uh, artificial intelligence will end up being what we call a GPT, or general purpose technology, much like the computer was, much like the internet was, those kinds of transformational technologies, that it becomes such a general purpose technology that's in everything. And when you fuse those things together, then you have hope that uh, that those event horizons will be what you want them to be.
It's interesting because history always does repeat itself, right? I mean, you look at the advent of the computer and just how much that changed our lives forever. Then we
Mm-hmm.
went to the mobile revolution. Look at how that's changed. I mean, now we're at 5G. I mean, bandwidth speeds anywhere in the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And now this is a perfect segue because I know another technology that you and I both are very passionate about and are doing work in is in the area of quantum computing. Now I'm spending the bulk of my life these days trying to prevent people from being harmed by them. Or at least an aspect of them, which is breaking encryption. But you're on the other side of it, which is, really taking this new technology paradigm, really getting it into market, getting the use cases built, and leveraging the technology. So where is Optum at with this technology, and where do you see the industry? It's such an infancy stage right now, but I mean, I think with Google and the quantum supremacy, and basically for those of you that don't know what quantum supremacy is, it's basically a quantum computer can now run calculations that a classical computer can't. But where are we with it? What's your take on the quantum revolution at this point?
So there's a lot to unpack there,
Yeah,
and I want to
a
give
lot,
it
a lot to unpack.
its due. So the quantum revolution is one of those that have really changed the world.
Yes.
I remember the rotary phones where you kind of dial and the thing goes all the way around, it comes all the way back. My father used to have one of those big AM radios with the vacuum tubes in the back,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so quantum is one of those things that will, when it comes about, it will create monumental changes in the world. And it was a passing fancy for a while, an academic fancy, an intellectual fancy for a while, until a particular geopolitical event happened, which is the open conflict between the U.S. and China for dominance in this space, both in the AI world, and quantum is certainly a part of that. But that is the driving force. It was passing intellectual fancy until this event occurred where China came down and said, we're going to win. The U.S. came down and said, no, we're going to win. All of them have two of the largest economies in the world, two of the largest bases of technological folks in the world, lots of resources in this space, and they're both equally capable. And it's an open conflict. Like, nobody's hiding it. That's pushing the quantum case.
Isn't that funny? Like, nobody's hiding it.
No one's
They're
hiding
basically saying we're at war over this technology.
Absolutely. And it was, the problem that needs to be solved is that the material science required to hold a subatomic particle long enough to do information processing on it and with enough fidelity to do it well is just awful. It's just bad. And that's the problem that needs to be solved, and we need to put physicists back to work to do that. Now, this conflict, like the race to the moon, is doing just that. And it's doing that because the consequences of that is geopolitical dominance for the next 100 years or more.
That's true.
That's a big stake. And all the parties are becoming aware. So you're seeing these huge camps getting in there and mobilizing their best people. So it'll be it's an interesting time to be alive. Let's put it that way.
It really is. But I think what's interesting, like, if you look at the race to the moon, all the innovations that came out of that benefit our lives today because of that race, it sharpens the arrow, right, to make it fly faster and better, and good things can come from it. So I think with any race, there's the consequence is innovation, and lots of innovation, and that innovation ultimately spills down into everything, right? So, but who do you think's leading right now? I mean, you know what we're doing. At least from the efforts, within the confines of the organized world. But we have, both China and Russia with some of the most brilliant scientific minds in the world that are behind a curtain that we can't see. And they're putting a lot more money into it than we are right now. Not just because they're putting money into it doesn't mean they're further ahead, but what I'm hearing is they are. So what's your thought? Where are we?
So we have that's a good thing to unpack, in that China's black hole when it comes to actual data coming in and data coming out. If you take a look at some of the maps of internet requests going back and forth, there's lots of stuff going into China and nothing coming out. So there's a black curtain there. They don't necessarily have the legal concerns that we do for this kind of work, or the regulatory concerns. So they have a leg up in that area. And we don't know what's behind that curtain so much, but we do know what's at stake. So it's hard to really gauge in terms of the international constituency who's really ahead. Historically, though, the U.S. has rallied, and we
really have.
We really do. I mean, Americans really understand who they are, and when big national conflicts like this come up, we tend to huddle together more so than most. And I have high hopes for us prevailing in this space.
Yeah, no, I do too. And one thing I do know is there's a lot of really good and dedicated people, that are behind this. And I mean, even just what I've seen just in the past 2 years of development efforts, and I was very fortunate. A CEO of one of my companies, Liquid Cool Solutions, that was doing high performance computing, left and became the president of D-Wave. And you probably know D-Wave as one of the first commercially available quantum computers. But to even see from the point that they announced their quantum computer, the annealer, look at what's happened since then. Isn't it amazing? I mean, doesn't it really astound you just how in just a few short years of that announcement where we're sitting right now? And now Intel announced they've got their Horse Ridge quantum chip. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot more in this space. It is hard to wrap your head around this sometimes, from the layperson's point of view, because you don't get normally associated with the comings and goings and ebbs and flows in this space. Then you hear about these things that aren't like what you know. Like there's in this space, when you take a look at subatomic particles and the information processing that occur there and the physics that occur at subatomic level allow us to do some really funky things in quantum. There's nothing like that in the regular classical world that we can even remotely go, this is kind of like that, so I can make the mental leap. It's not. It's totally different things. And so you have things like subatomic particles, quantum waves, qubits, superposition, quantum interference, quantum entanglement, quantum teleportation. These are terms that normal people don't hear.
No, that's right.
And
it's
yeah. hard for us to wrap our heads around that.
Now, what kind of is amazing to me, so have you ever been to Intel's headquarters? I think you have, but they have like a little museum, like how they came up with the first transistor and just kind of the whole, have you seen that?
I've not been there, but I know of that place.
Okay, well, it's so fascinating. But, one thing that strikes you when you go through the museum is just how when this technology, when the first transistors were manufactured, what a revolutionary, I mean, it's where we are right now with quantum, right? Like, and you see the process of refinement over time and how it got better and better and better. But to think now that we will be putting particles and capturing particles and manipulating them for the quantum effect, and to have a computer now that's going to be basically just above absolute zero at 4 Kelvin. I mean, that blows my mind. And that we're able to manipulate particles to process information using a quantum effect. Who would have ever saw that coming, even 15 years ago? Isn't that amazing? I mean, when you think about it?
Absolutely. And I think that thing that goes corollary to that harkens to the philosopher's world. Like, what are we going to do with that? We've improved this massive technology. What about our own human character to manage that equitably? Has that grown as well? And where is that? That's the linchpin in all this, that the advent of social media was a disrupting force, and it caused a lot of problems. A lot of families don't talk to each other because of the social media aspects to it. But in that, and there's a lot of what we call mind viruses that occurred from that and got propagated, near and far. But because of that, we became inoculated in certain areas of our general population to the wiles of that space. We've grown in terms of our human character at scale because we realized, hey, this is kind of like LSD was in the 60s. It's great for a little while, but it really doesn't help long term. And we grew. We said, you know what, this is bad for you. Let's not do this anymore. Let's do something more laudable. That pattern, hopefully, will continue when we get into these new domains where it really needs to be there. And hopefully we'll grow as a population to the point where we can properly handle some of these very sharp tools.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into, for a lot of people that don't know anything about quantum computers, there's different types. You have a quantum annealer, you have analog quantum, universal quantum, and then you have the new, cryogenically created, quantum chips. Can you give us kind of a handle on what's the state of the market? Who are the players? Who's the leaders? And then really, what are you guys doing in this area?
So good stuff, a lot to unpack. I think that the quantum gate model is the one that you're going to see probably get most prominence moving forward. It basically says, like if you've got a GPU these days and you've got a gaming unit and it does those kinds of processes that are better articulated and manifested on a GPU rather than a CPU, it goes through its classical program, finds a little bit of work it needs to do, tosses over to the GPU, it does its thing real fast, gives its result back, and we continue along that classical processing. And the quantum gate model is really just replaces that GPU with a QPU, quantum processing unit, and comes across that same classical program, comes across a problem that would be best solved with a quantum processor, tosses over the fence, it does its thing, and sends it all back. So that model allows us to do a lot of things, whereas, say, like quantum annealer, as wonderful as and amazing as that thing is, it's really a whole computer that does only one thing. And so fantastic at optimization problems, and there's tons of them, from traffic to logistics to portfolio optimization in the finance realm. But I think you'll see that's a little more of a unitasker, and the quantum gate model is going to be a little bit more what you'll see happening moving forward. Now, as far as what we're doing with this, we're in a unique position because we can wait. Like, Those guys who are in the IBM position, the Microsoft and all that, they got to solve quantum problems with quantum hardware now.
Yeah,
We
that's
don't
right.
have to do that. We can solve healthcare problems with the intent to do patents and defensive publishing now without ever having to actually use a a quantum hardware, because those things allow, we would typically use the simulators, which are
Yeah, that's
the
right.
mathematical best case. It's the ideal state of what the hardware is trying to catch up to. I mean,
Right.
granted, we wouldn't be able to solve these enormous problems with hundreds and thousands of qubits, but you don't need to do that if you're pursuing just patents and defensive publishing, which gives us the ability to play in the marketplace unimpeded in future patent wars in this space. And for our purposes right now, and that's precisely what we're doing, we can do that. We can do it with a low-cost budget and next scale with people on 3 different continents, which is what we're doing right now on the educational side of the quantum, and that gives us a leg up.
Yeah.
So we're in
No,
a different
that's
space.
and so you're really are you really more in terms of how you're looking at quantum is what are the applications of it and how do we build the next generation applications that will leverage it? So you're really not so much on the hardware side of it, but you're more about the what you'll do with it once you get it, right?
It's exactly right. So there are 2 camps. There's the producers out there and those who
Right.
are making the technology, and those are, like your D-Waves and Microsoft Rigettis and all those kinds of guys. Don't discount really, I forget. There's a couple other ones that just skipping my mind. Bell Labs and all that. They're the producers. They're making the tech. We're the consumers. Once there's a clear winner in that space, they're going to throw the tech over the fence. We're going to grab it and try to use it to solve actual problems. But until then, we can work on different types of problems. We don't have to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what we're
That's
looking,
fascinating. I mean, to think of the because there is a very big strategy behind all this, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So our strategy, because we're on this side of the fence and we don't have to solve problems having to delve into hardware, then what we're actually interested in is a source of innovation in between quantum and healthcare. And the source of innovation is really twofold. And the first one is that there are patterns of problems that we know can be solved in the quantum space that exist in the wild. And if we can take those problems and match them to business domains or clinical domains, healthcare domains in a separate area, and solve that problem with it, we have innovation. And that's one of the areas of innovation. We lift and shift and match known algorithms to problems that are either quantum friendly or force friendly in healthcare domain, which is extraordinarily rich. And now we've got big green fields of potential candidates for that. That's a real source of innovation. The other one is, and let me backtrack for a little bit. When you're dealing with things like protein folding and genomic medicine and things like that are wholesale, quantum friendly, that's where that comes in. But when you look at the quantum classical relationship, and you have a process that is classical in nature, but a small part of it can be quantum, and usually there are problems that are avoided because they're so hard to solve. When we hit that small part and we can throw it over the fence to a quantum processing unit and have that solve that, and then continue along, then we open up all these other areas and look at the green fields from genetics and genomics, augmented decision making, behavioral and mental health, fraud, waste, and abuse, healthcare ops, EMRs, patient personalization, precision medicine, intelligent assistance. All of those now become fodder for those kinds of things. And what a big green fields that is.
Well, and especially when you think about when you guys leverage your vast knowledge and expertise in AI, and you marry it with this brand new computing technology, I mean, it's unbelievable to think about the possibilities because really the bottleneck, if you really think about it right now, is you have massive reservoirs of data. How do you manage that data? How do you analyze that data? And then how do you speed up the ability to calculate by accessing all that information? Like I can think of just off the top of my mind about 100 million different use cases. Like one that I think would be really neat is if all the insurance companies could all come together and all the medical companies could all come together in a singular place where they can exchange information to try to figure out, like, for instance, in a geography, why are so many people having cancer at a certain zip code? Maybe there's something going on. But if you had a computer that could, in real time, just in milliseconds, look at all of the possible calculations and come up with an answer, isn't that amazing? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
It is. I mean, when you take a look at an arbitrary chessboard and you try to solve that in binary thinking, it's like, let's take this and let's take that, and then let's decompose those, and soon enough you get this big tree that's larger than all the atoms in the universe. But a quantum computing can take a look at that arbitrary chessboard and make one calculation and get the winning move. And that's powerful.
Oh, I mean, I'm thinking about cancer, for instance, because you could literally create a data model that looks at my genetic makeup, my blood type, all this data on me that could be captured, and it could analyze that and spit out an answer. Here's the best possible treatment for him. I mean, actually have a friend whose company is doing just that. I mean, they're taking all this data and analyzing it to give you better outcomes for cancer. But I mean, with a quantum computer and with your AI capability, I mean, you're talking about a level of accuracy where you could literally say, do this, and it'll fix it. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Well, I think in a theoretical level, when quantum computers are available, when quantum computers are actually available and the fidelity is good, things like that, those kinds of capabilities will be within reach.
Wow.
Particularly, I think when you're starting to look at drug development and molecular manipulation and research at the molecular level for
Right.
molecules that can be part of these new evolution of drugs that can help really sick people. I think those are some of the kinds of days we're looking forward to.
Well, because you'll be able to run simulations on a drug that the accuracy of these models are so great that it could just literally show you what would happen if you did it. I mean, I mean, I know, it's just amazing. So I guess this is a perfect, I guess a point to ask this question then. So where do you think healthcare is going to be within 20 years? And are we going to see less people working and more technology, or more people working and less technology? What do you think?
So there's a few questions that need to be begged there. Before we take healthcare, let's take the working aspect. When we saw lots of the reports and things like that were done with senior management across many enterprises. One of the very last things they expected AI to do was to replace humans. Because at the current maturing of the AI technology, the only humans it can really replace are those people who do back office jobs that are repetitive, that never talk to humans ever, like stacking boxes in an Amazon warehouse, and have no creativity to them whatsoever. Those are things that AI can sort of replace. Now, given that, and that's a small percentage of the population, what happens elsewhere is that it begins to augment humans. So we force
Right.
multiply these humans. It's kind of like the military has a phrase, force multiplication of soldiers. You take a soldier, amp him up on AI, and he can do a lot more.
Right.
I mean, it's a terrible metaphor, but we can, particularly in the clinical space, we want to augment the clinicians so that they can do a lot more work without getting fatigued and tired, because the AI does the heavy lifting in an augmentative way, and that helps them there. So I think you'll see that the population will have a number of different aspects. There'll be a segment of the population that can be augmented and do more stuff. There'll be others that will be in the development and designing space. I think you'll just see the whole population move forward as this kind of technology proliferates and becomes commonplace. I think you'll see that. Now, with healthcare, you'll see massive changes because the healthcare is ripe for that, and it's the maturing in that space. It's a conservative area by nature, and that prevents innovation from really taking hold unless you get a COVID type situation where all of that conservativeness has to step aside and let the people really push across the finish line, the new technology to cater to that particular situation. Here's an example. An AI, like a drug, cannot replace a human in the clinical space, according to the FDA. And if it does, and there are many instances in which it does, it must be FDA regulated. And even if it does, and it becomes FDA regulated, it cannot learn on its own in production. So, for instance, if I give you a drug and give your wife a drug, it's both the same drug, but the drug, and your wife goes, hey, I'm in the wife, and so I'm going to change my efficacy and change my, drug molecular composition to behave in a different way. Well, that just wouldn't work. And so the FDA kind of looks at it like that, and that's a big deal. So machine learning models in the clinical space, they can't learn. They have to be put into production and never change. Now, if you're on the left-hand side of augmentation, you can do a lot of other stuff, but you have to maintain the space where you're saying, I'm just simply informing the clinician of your options. I'm not telling you what to do. As long as we stay on that side, we're going to be good and do some amazing things. But if we step over into that, I'm telling the clinician what to do, replacing him, then you come under the supervision of the FDA, and that changes things and makes things innovation slower.
Interesting. And by the way, this kind of proves that some of the laws and regulations have caught up to the technology. Because that's one of the concerns I have is you have a bunch of people that are making laws that have no idea about how these technologies work, right?
Those are valid concerns.
And they're very valid. And
yes, sir.
But it's well, I'll tell you what, you and I could probably, I think we have to do another episode of this to even go deeper into some of this. But I just have to tell you, this was such a wonderfully insightful podcast, and I am so glad we got a chance to do this. And I hope you'll do this again with us, because I just think, the listeners here got a lot out of this conversation, and there's, I know, a lot more that we could go deeper dive into. So, but I think for a very first one between you and I, this is a great time. But thank you so much for doing this today. This really means a lot.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope you'll have me back.
Oh, definitely. Well, have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Yep. All right. You there?
I am definitely here. That went well. You're
that was
very
awesome.
skilled at this. You did a great job.
You did a fabulous job. Thank